Another high-profile visit to Ukraine as Russia steps up its offensive in the country's east. The war in Ukraine continues to resonate here in Taiwan. Protesters take to the streets in 3 cities to show their support for Kyiv. Also ahead, one candidate, one winner. Former Security Chief John Lee becomes Hong Kong's new leader. And a winning streak. Team Taiwan add 2 more medals to their collection at the Deaflympics in Brazil. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Many people across Taiwan felt the effects of a magnitude 6.1 earthquake, which hit just about an hour ago. According to the Central Weather Bureau, the epicenter was in the east of the island, about 90 kilometers off the coast of Hualien County. Buildings shook briefly, but there were no immediate reports of damage. And to other news now. U.S.'s First Lady Jill Biden has made an unannounced visit to Ukraine, where she met with Ukraine's First Lady Olena Zelenska. The pair met in the country's west, while in the east, Russia stepped up its offensive. Jaime Ocon has the latest.
This is what remains of a school in the Luhansk region of Ukraine, where over 60 people are believed to have died. Authorities say a Russian bomb was dropped on Sunday afternoon, and the surrounding areas were heavily shelled. This comes as almost 500 civilians were evacuated from the besieged neighboring city of Mariupol, including many women and children who were sheltering for weeks in a steel plant.
Вот номер был у меня 158. Это было время как раз в 11 часов, в 12 часов. До 6 часов просидели, вот, записывались люди, но ничего не получилось, не уехали. Ну и домой пошла. Вот, собрала вещи и на следующее утро вот пораньше подъехала, мне еще повезло. Вот, волонтеры меня подвезли.
The steel plant sits near the strategic southern port of the Azov Sea and is the last part of the city still in the hands of Ukrainian fighters. There are fears that Russian forces are determined to capture Mariupol before the traditional Victory Day parade on May 9th. In a video marking the anniversary of Europe's victory over Nazism in World War II, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky urged the country to remain steadfast in defending its sovereignty.
Жодне зло не уникне відповідальності, не зможе сховатись в бункері. Від нього не лишиться каменя на камені. Тож ми все подолаємо, і ми знаємо це точно, бо наші військові і всі наші люди – нащадки тих, хто подолав нацизм. Тож переможуть знову. І знову буде мир, нарешті знову.
In another show of solidarity, U.S. First Lady Jill Biden met with the Ukrainian First Lady Olena Zelenska on Sunday.
I thought it was important to show the Ukrainian people that this war has to stop. And this war has been brutal, and that the people of the United States stand with the people of Ukraine.
Dr. Biden went on to visit a refugee camp near the Slovakian border, where she met with Ukrainians who had escaped the fighting.
How do you explain it to your children? The war. How do you explain the war to your children?
It's very difficult how I explain. Юлія, як я тобі поясню, що таке війна? It's difficult to explain. I don't know. I only said that it's what I cannot explain. I cannot explain because I don't know myself.
In the 2.5 months since the Russian invasion, almost 6 million Ukrainians have left the country. That's more than 10% of its total population, now living as refugees, waiting for the day that it's safe to return home. Patrick Chen and Jaime Ocon for TaiwanPlus.
Protesters gathered in solidarity with Ukraine across 3 Taiwanese cities on Sunday on the anniversary of Victory in Europe Day. Demonstrations were held in Taipei, Taichung and Hsinchu. Our reporter was James Chater, and he was at the protest in Taipei.
Beneath the arches of Taipei's Liberty Square, the solemn sound of Ukraine's national anthem plays out. On Sunday, protesters gathered in Taipei's capital once more in solidarity with the war-torn country.
We also want to show that there is small victories. A lot of people didn't expect that Ukraine will stand for more than 3 days. It's already 2 months.
The protest in Taipei was one of 3 taking place across Taiwan on the anniversary of Victory in Europe Day, which marks the end of World War II on the continent. PhD student Victoria recently arrived in Taiwan from Ukraine's capital, Kyiv.
And I think it's also a great opportunity for many people, especially for those who are still in danger in Ukraine. So it's really nice to see that a country which is so far away from Ukraine doing so much to help Ukrainians right now.
Comparisons have been drawn between Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the threat posed to Taiwan by China, which claims Taiwan as part of its territory. Echoes of Ukraine's situation in Taiwan is what motivated Song Nianchun to come to the protest.
台湾跟乌克兰很像，对，也是民主国家，而且现在台湾的对岸就是中国，中国就是也有相同的情形，就是不断的一直在台海挑衅。
And that resonance is what continues to bring people back to demonstrations. There have been many protests like this here in Taiwan since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began nearly 3 months ago. And while demonstrations here don't see the same huge numbers as protests in other countries around the world, protesters here are hoping their voices calling for peace will be heard in what they say is a senseless war. As Russia's offensive in Ukraine shows no signs of waning, demonstrators wanted to make it clear that they too are in this for the long haul.
The war is not sprint. It's not enough to come one day and say, like, wish for peace or pray for peace or whatever. We need to support them every day, and this is marathon. This is very hard work for us and for everyone to make the war stop and help those people who are surviving.
Slava Ukraine!
Amid the darkness of war, chants of glory to Ukraine ring out halfway across the world, a message that the besieged country is not alone. Rick E. and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
The head of the US's Central Intelligence Agency says China will be drawing sharp lessons from the war in Ukraine as it considers any future effort to take Taiwan by force. William Burns was speaking at a Financial Times event in Washington, D.C. The CIA chief said Beijing has seen Ukrainians' resistance to Russia's invasion and the way the US and its allies have rallied to Ukraine's support. But Burns said Chinese President Xi Jinping's long-term goal to bring Taiwan under Beijing's control has not changed. Comparisons have been made between Ukraine's situation and the threat posed by China to Taiwan, which Beijing claims as part of its territory.
Clearly, the Chinese leadership is trying to look carefully at what lessons they should draw from Ukraine about their own ambitions in Taiwan. I don't for a minute think that it's eroded Xi's determination over time to gain control over Taiwan, but I think it's something that's affecting their calculation about how and when they go about doing that as well.
Russia is celebrating its annual Victory Day to mark the Soviet defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. Moscow's Red Square is set to host a parade of troops, tanks, rockets and intercontinental ballistic missiles. Russia's President Vladimir Putin will give a speech that is likely to offer insights on the future course of his war in Ukraine. Putin has sought to portray his invasion of Ukraine as a bid to denazify Russia's neighbor. But on Sunday, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky told G7 leaders that Russia is imitating, quote, precisely the evil that the Nazis brought to Europe. European leaders, including Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz, have condemned Putin's comparisons of World War II with what they call his war of aggression in Ukraine. Our reporter Rick Glauert spoke to Valery Zutati, a visiting assistant professor of political science at the University of Kansas. He began by asking about the day's significance.
For both, for people and the government. For people, because pretty much every Russian family has some connection to World War II in a sense that either a member died in fighting or was killed in some other way or participated at the very least during the war with Nazi Germany and other Axis countries. And for Putin, it is also an important marker of Russia's greatness. Why? Because Russia emerged as one of the victors in the Second World War, right? So, and it was one of the major powers that defeated Nazi countries.
And why might Putin formally declare war on Ukraine? And what would that achieve for him and his aims? And what would it mean for the Russian people?
That would mean also mobilization, perhaps partial mobilization or total mobilization. Total mobilization is unlikely. We are very unlikely to see something like, Second World War picture with millions of people in the battlefield. It's just very hard to imagine at this point. And many Russians will dislike this, such an aggravation, because it will concern, pretty much everyone. And then, it's one thing to watch war on the TV, and the other thing is to be in constant danger to be drafted to the army and, thrown into the battlefield. So there's a sense that this declaration of war and mobilization would be unproductive.
How might we see Moscow's approach to the war in Ukraine change after May 9th?
After May 9th, there will be no more pressure for the Russian government to achieve some sort of a very quick victory in Ukraine, some quick results. So I would say it will relieve the government of the necessity to provide very quick results to any date.
Taiwan recorded 40,000 new domestic COVID-19 infections on Monday, along with 12 deaths. This follows another 12 COVID-19 related deaths on Sunday, the highest single-day numbers so far this year. All of those who died over the past 2 days were aged 50 and over. 9 of them had not been vaccinated, while another 2 only had a single shot. The government is moving to get medication to senior patients faster, especially nursing home residents who are close contacts of confirmed cases. China is doubling down on its zero COVID policy, with Shanghai stepping up its lockdown measures into the second half of May. Strict curbs on movement are being extended across the city. That's despite falling case numbers. Authorities in some districts were ordering people back indoors on Sunday. Before now, residents were allowed outside for brief walks or to buy essentials. Meanwhile, China's capital, Beijing, is desperately trying to avoid a Shanghai-style lockdown by mass testing residents almost daily. Coming up, Marcos 2.0. Could the son of a former dictator be poised to win the Philippines presidential election? We'll take a look after the break. Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. To Hong Kong now, which has named its new chief executive, John Lee, who was the sole candidate in Hong Kong's small circle leadership race. It's the first time a former security chief has been appointed to the role, and it's raising concerns that Beijing's tough policy toward the city will continue. Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick has the story.
He had 99% of the votes in his favour, but it was no surprise that former security head John Lee was the top contender for the chief executive post, as there was only one candidate on the ballot. Ordinary Hong Kongers weren't invited to Sunday's vote. Just 1,500 elites, vetted by John Lee himself, were allowed to pick the city's leader.
特首選舉，我覺得基本上其實都唔係好關我哋呢啲市井市民嘅事咯，因為其實我據我了解，好似佢嘅即係投得票嘅人，好似都只係得千幾個咁，其實係變相有700幾萬都係投唔到票，所以其實我覺得佢就算係有啲咩嘅嘢，其實都唔好關我哋事咯，因為我哋都冇得投咁樣咯。根本就係欽點咯。 係，如果容許我講嘅就係中央政府委派佢去做咯，而唔係俾市民去當選。
Lee is credited with helping shut down the sustained 2019 anti-government protests, which took over the streets of Hong Kong for nearly 6 months.
This shows that security and law and order continue to be a very important priority for the central government. I think it shows that they're not confident about the security situation in Hong Kong, and therefore they need a policeman to continue to crack down.
Over the course of this one-horse race, Lee has done little to inspire excitement among the people or renewed confidence in Hong Kong's future. But this failure to earn popular trust may in fact be what earned him Beijing's trust.
John Lee does not demonstrate the political skills that I would have thought someone would need to govern Hong Kong. Evidence of that is the way we backed into the protests in 2019. One of the characteristics of all of our chief executive appointees is they do not have political skills. And this seems to be a requirement. They are not able to mobilize, galvanize the people of Hong Kong. They're not charismatic. We do have politicians who can do that. And I'm not referring just to the ones in jail. I mean, those people who are in Exco now, some of them. They are able to do that. But the party does not want these sorts of people. So we are left with people without political skills.
In the 2 years since Beijing's imposition of the national security law, Hong Kong's freedoms have been rapidly shrinking, and hundreds of activists, politicians, and journalists have been caught in its dragnet. When Lee begins his first 5-year term on July 1st, experts say we should expect more of the same.
In the past years, we have seen the Chinese and Hong Kong governments were relying upon the law enforcement, particularly the police force, to suppress protests and to arrest political opposition leaders and activists and journalists in order to stabilize the regime. So it is not too surprising that Beijing wants to consolidate its control on Hong Kong by choosing a hawkish hardliner who has a police background and who will be absolutely obedient to Beijing's command.
With Hong Kong's government under complete control of Beijing and its proxies, the city is expected to introduce local legislation, in addition to the national security law, to expand its range of weapons to further clamp down on critics.
And it is also possible that churches, religious organizations, they will be under the local national security law. It is also possible that the government would introduce a licensing system for journalists. In order to tame all the local media outlets to be obeyed to Beijing.
While Lee's elevation was never open to debate, it is still a pivotal moment. Governed by business people and civil administrators since its handover in 1997, Hong Kong is for the first time in the hands of a candidate from the disciplined services. He is also the first to face no competition, even from within the ranks of the pro-Beijing faction, or from a committee already stacked with government loyalists. Lee is a new breed of leader for a new Hong Kong. Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick for TaiwanPlus.
It's election day in the Philippines, where 67.5 million voters are choosing their next president. Campaigning has long been arduous, with widespread disinformation targeting presidential candidates. But as James Chater reports, the campaign is as much about the past as it is about the present.
As Filipinos head to the polls, they won't just be deciding a president, but an understanding of their country's history. Polls suggest only 2 of the 10 presidential candidates stand a chance of victory, and the choice is stark. Current Vice President and leader of the opposition, Leni Robredo, a human rights lawyer and grassroots activist, or Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the namesake son of the country's former dictator, who was removed from power by a people's revolt in 1986.
The election now is, I think, is a result of several decades of preparations. Since they were ousted in 1986, they have really been planning for their comeback.
Marcos Jr., also known by the nickname Bongbong or BBM, has tried to refashion his family's image and distance himself from his father's legacy of brutal martial-era rule. And it appears to be working. Marcos Jr. has led polls throughout the campaign, but he's most popular amongst the youngest Filipinos. In a February poll, 77% of 18 to 24-year-olds said they will vote for him. And that's leading some to say, at this election, the very memory of the country's authoritarian history is at stake.
It's all authoritarian nostalgia because he always presents the time of his father as the good old days to which the Philippines should return. And only he could do that because he is a president who will restore unity in this country and pride in being Filipino.
So how is this symbol of the Philippines' deep-rooted dynastic politics and authoritarian past on the cusp of persuading the country that he's the antidote to the nation's political ills? Analysts say it's a mix of education about the 2-decade Marcos era being scaled back, at the exact time social media use in the country of 110 million exploded.
So it's like a perfect storm. So the the curriculum was overhauled at the same time that social media was becoming more prominent in the country, and the Marcoses took advantage of that for their disinformation and so forth.
The potential of disinformation to impact political outcomes is huge. Filipinos spend more than 4 hours on social media every day. That's 2 hours more than the global average and the highest of any country in the world.
Can you imagine the 4 hours daily that you spend in social media? Can you imagine, since social media is so filled with garbage, and toxic materials, can you imagine the kind of toxicity that you inhale,
Ellen Tordesias works at Philippine fact-checking site Verifiles. They found that disinformation in the run-up to the vote largely favoured Bongbong Marcos, including claims that human rights violations during his father's brutal premiership were never proven. By contrast, they say negative disinformation mostly targeted Leni Robredo, the only female presidential candidate at this election.
Gendered disinformation really truly is a huge problem. But here's the other part. It's not just women. Anyone who was marginalized before is marginalized even more. This is the incentive structure and the design of social media.
Scholar Jail Cornelio says this potent combination means many Filipinos lack a historic arsenal to interrogate their country's history and how current leaders relate to it.
And because of this circumstances, people fall for grand, seductive narratives of unity, of moving forward, of national reconciliation, national healing, things, virtuous messages that you would hear, seemingly virtuous words that you would hear from Bongbong Marcos.
Which could mean, at this election, Filipinos may look to a family symbolic of their authoritarian past to lead their future. Alex Chen and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
Team Taiwan is making a splash at the Deaflympics. The global games for the hard of hearing is being held in Brazil. On Friday, the team bagged 2 more medals. And with strong performances from athletes ranging from 16 to 61 years old, it also showed that sport is for people of all ages. John Van Trieste has this report.
Taiwan's deaf athletes have added another silver and bronze to their collection at this year's Deaflympics. The men's table tennis team went into the finals Friday fresh from a 3-0 victory over Kazakhstan. It had to settle for second after losing by 1 point to Ukraine in the finals. But team member Yang Rongzong was still happy with the result.
输了没关系，就下次再来。对啊，我们还是有机会的。然后我们还有单打跟双打都要拼，所以我们还不能中介。
Also on Friday, 16-year-old and newcomer to the Deaflympics, Xu Mingrui, won bronze in the men's 10-meter air pistol event. Taiwan's most memorable performance, though, came without a medal. 61-year-old Sun Shuliang finished 5th in a taekwondo event known as men's Pumse. But while Sun didn't make it onto the medal podium, his performance won him a warm round of applause from the spectators. This year's Deaflympics is taking place in the Brazilian city of Caxias do Sul after a year-long delay due to COVID-19. As in most international sporting events, Taiwan is taking part under the name Chinese Taipei. The games wrap up May 15th. Damon Lin and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Finally today, we leave you with some images of street arts from around the world opposing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the TaiwanPlus app. Stay safe and see you next time.